Our playlist is now on all platforms.
Whoa.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's still not on all platforms, but specifically Zach and Courtney wanted it on Amazon because that's what they use, and I happily obliged, and it was pretty easy. So if you want to know, this can be part of the podcast. If you want to know what our church sings, or if you currently go to Restoration and you want to hear our hymn book, we have an 81 song playlist of pretty much everything we do. And
Specifically 81 songs?
I only know that because I just added the 81st song, which is Justice Will Roll Down by Sandra McCracken.
That's fitting for what we're talking about today.
And it's a great song. So go listen to the playlist. I will put the link in the description. And you can download it wherever you listen to music, as long as it's Apple Music, Spotify, or Amazon Music.
Which is 99.999% of everyone.
Yes. If you're on Tidal, sorry, I'm not getting a Tidal subscribe.
Or Bandcamp, or...
Yeah.
What else is there?
Napster.
Oh, does Napster still exist?
Pretty sure it's...
Oh my gosh.
You know, Napster actually, if I remember this correctly, and if this is still true, pays musicians more than any other streaming service for the plays of their music.
To make up for all the crime they committed in early days.
I guess maybe so.
Were you like alive enough at the time to know what was happening?
Did you ever use LimeWire?
Yes, I used Napster. Actually, I used the Mac version of that called Macster, because all of us Mac people at the time were very excluded from music sharing. And then LimeWire came out, which was actually, I think, Apple forward initially, but it was both. And that was when I got to college, everything was LimeWire.
You could get everything on LimeWire, especially viruses.
All the good and all the bad.
Yep.
Welcome to LimeWire.com.
That was hotwire.com.
Yeah, whatever.
All right, one thing before we get into the seriousness, the serious meat of it. What is your favorite, like, commercial with a jingle from back in the day?
Whew. You go first, so I have time to think, because I think you have an answer to this.
I have a few. I'll try to narrow it down. I really love the Get Connected for Free on Education Connection.
Ooh, that's good.
And there was also the one, I can't remember the words, but it was something about like getting your finances in order, and they had to buy this crappy car because their credit was bad. It was for one of the credit checking services. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a car dealership locally in Northern Virginia where I lived called Safford Lincoln Mercury, and they had this awful jingle, but it's worth repeating. It's affordable at Safford Lincoln Mercury.
That's pretty bad.
That's pretty bad.
That actually reminds me, that we had a local car jingle that was really great. Because it was based off of a 70s funk song. It was, nice. We want to see ya in a River Chase Kia.
Oh, wow. That's really awful. I mean, that's the point. They're supposed to be kind of bad so you remember them.
Mm-hmm. There's a current one that's not even a jingle. It just, whenever it's on the radio, it's for Hendrick Automotive Group, which sells like every type of car. And it starts with this ding, like an iPhone notification. And I'm convinced it's meant to like, drive a Pavlovian response, so that every time you hear a ding, you think about Hendrick Automotive. Crazy stuff.
Crazy stuff. Anyway,
you're going to hear about all that and more today on the Accessibly Anglican podcast.
A podcast for the Anglo-curious. Hit that jingle.
Podcast that could have a new name.
Yeah, maybe we should poll our 1.2 listeners on whether we should change the name.
Alistair. Should we change our name? I think he does.
Oh. He might not even know that we've re-upped.
He may not.
Recordings.
But should we? He was excited about the playlist.
The last check, it was like 0 or maybe 1 views on our second recording of the new
He did text me after you put out that email with the playlist that I was talking about, and he said, "I want to listen to the playlist," and I was like, "That's great."
Great.
So anyway, our church
Our church
is trying to move. True or false?
It is highly open to doing so.
It's one way to put it.
It is actively looking at opportunities downtown. There's more details that will come in what I imagine to be the coming weeks. If you're listening to this and you're a member of our church, you would have heard me talk about this at our all-church meeting on Sunday. I think we released this on Monday morning, so this will have been more of a reflection for you. But yeah, I mean, we would have shared with the church that there is an opportunity for us as a church downtown right now currently. It's still, at least at time of recording, not a done deal, and there are some things to work out to really make it a done deal. Lord willing, it will be, but we don't know. We have to wait and see. Now, it's possible that between now and Sunday, more developments could happen with it. So, but the point is, I think it's safe to say, our church has been sensing a call to, as we have outgrown our space in the burbs, we are currently, if you're a Birmingham person, in Liberty Park, which is the far east suburb of Vestavia Hills, or far east development. And we have increasingly felt a call toward downtown, toward the city.
And I want to talk for a minute about how that came to be.
Please.
So the place where we are now, Smooth Rock Conference Center, has been wonderful to us. We reflect on that, not without challenge, as any space would have when you're trying to start a church, but it's beautiful. It's in the woods. It's very cool, and it's more than we could have hoped for in a first space. And I have been at the church since one of the very first times you were ever even at Smooth Rock.
Yeah.
And I have been at the church since the first official service. Yep. So that's what I've known. Before that, it was your house. And I think I'm correct in saying that in the process of looking for somewhere else, somewhere that feels more permanent, that's how we sort of came to this, well, what about downtown? The church I was at previously was very much about its place. It was started in Homewood, and it was for Homewood. They wouldn't move anywhere. In fact, there was a time when they were looking for a different place, and there was a place that looked promising, but it was technically right outside of Homewood, and they said, nope. But that's not part of our vision necessarily. We're very for Birmingham. Yeah. Birmingham is a big metro area. Yeah. So how did we, aside from a calling, what was sort of the first, inkling that maybe we'd move towards downtown?
Yeah, I think there are a couple different pieces to this. Number one, and again, we'll share this with our church on Sunday, but number one, there's a practical element. We have done, over the past year plus, really almost year and a half now, a pretty extensive and exhaustive search for the next space. And what we found is that for a church of our size and budget, it's almost impossible to find an adequately sized and suited space for the kind of budget that we can afford in the burbs.
Right.
Things are just more expensive in the more affluent sections of the city.
Go figure.
So you go downtown, and it opens up more pots. So there's a very practical piece, but I think it's very safe to say that there's far more involved in it than that. And what I think the Lord has shown us through this, and sometimes he needs to kind of nudge you through the practical to get you to focus on the meat of the issue. And that is that our church, over the last couple of years, certainly over the last year, I think has coalesced around a vision for what it means to be followers of Jesus. And that vision includes not just the vertical aspects of following Jesus, that is personal to God, it's also horizontal. What does it mean for the gospel to work toward the renewal of a place? What does it mean for us as Christians to seek shalom, to seek the good of our city, to recognize its broken past and the ways that that broken past affects it in the present? And what does it mean to, in Jesus' own words, to be somebody that came not to be served, but to serve, to actually be mindful for the least of these, for people who are struggling, people who are not just struggling spiritually, yes, but also materially. How can we paint a picture of the coming kingdom by leaning into that work?
Yeah. And I don't want to get too off subject, so let's keep this rabbit hole shallow.
Okay.
But tell me a little bit more about, in your mind, what a calling looks like. Because I think that's something that I've struggled with. If you remember, when I first started at the church, it was about 6 months in, and I was like, hey, what if I raised some funds to supplement so that I could actually be like on staff? And I struggled with this feeling of like, well, is this actually a calling, or do I just want to do this? And that's sort of what we talked about in the last episode. If you want to go back and hear our previous episode of the podcast, we talk more about like, you know, what is it wrong to desire certain callings, basically, because, you know, we believe that a calling comes from God, but can it also just be something that you want, you know?
Yes and yes. I think calling and desire have to overlap, you know, to some extent. Obviously, there's like
Except for Jonah.
I was going to say there are always exceptions to the rule, and yet I think generally speaking, God maps desire and calling over top of each other and interweaves them. It's John Eldridge that wrote the book Desire. I think his quote was basically, "Desire is the roadmap to calling," and obviously, you have to suss that out because we have different layers of desire. Sometimes the heart is deceitful, et cetera, et cetera. However, I think one of the sort of foundational things is the desire biblical? And in this case, yes. Is it supported by the wisdom of the consensus of the people of God, our church? Like, is there consensus around this? The answer is yes.
If everybody else says no to what you want to do.
Yeah, then that's a pretty striking exception to your sense of call. So, you know, consensus / just wisdom collectively, biblical. And then also, I think there's a part of calling that has to do with your, and this is the contrary to the first point, your sense of comfort. You know, a calling often pushes you outside of your comfort zone. It may be something that you have a desire for, but it's also maybe scary at the same time.
I had to quit my job that had insurance and stuff.
100%.
You know, and I think another part of it too, something that you can't say this about yourself because it would sound braggadocious, but I can say it about you, is you have to really listen. And I think that's one way you can separate just your own desires and your own plans from if God really has it in store for you. And I think that's something that you do very well.
Wow.
And something that we've talked about too on the podcast and in our church is how to cultivate sort of a quietness that allows you to listen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think all those are true. There's a Holy Spirit guidance and leading, and that's less easy to define, but it's no less important. And then there are the sort of more like embodied, consensus, sense of desire, sense of all those things. Go ahead.
Right. And so relatedly to what we talked about last time is that I think that a lot of us in our church, it's not surprising that a church will attract like-minded people. That's sort of just a natural, if you start a group of any kind, it's going to draw like-minded people. That's kind of what a group does. And I think that a lot of people in our church would say that they have a desire for a sort of typical, what some might call an urban ministry, in which we are able to hopefully coexist, befriend, and serve people that are different from us.
Yeah.
And we talked about last time how not everybody has that opportunity.
Yeah.
But we believe that we've really felt that call, which is, for people that already desired that, is exciting.
And I think it's safe to say too, or did I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
I think it's safe to say too, the interesting dialectic with this is, on the one hand, our church in particular has always talked about this vision of land, of this like place of beauty, rest, and recreation. I'm talking several acres, right? We've talked about this
Ideally.
before, ideally, that has place for gardens, public, place of a reprieve where somebody can come, a third space, and just meet with God or simply walk the grounds if they're confused and searching or whatever. And I had always envisioned that naturally to be a place somewhere in the suburbs because there's more land seemingly available there. And there's this place behind where we live, Sickard Hollow Road, that has hundreds of acres of undeveloped land. So I had always kind of assumed, and maybe the Lord will still do that like we would be a church out in the burbs because so much of our vision happens through quiet, contemplative, reflective, monastic. You think of monasteries primarily being in like the countryside, right? And outside of the hubbub of the city. And yet, at the same time, while that's also true, our church has been cultivating and receiving this sense of desire from God to enter into the brokenness of our city. And it's interesting because both of those are true. Like even in my own self, and I've talked to several of our people that have these almost conflicting desires. On the one hand, to be like living a monastic life in quiet, solitude, reflection, all of that, but also this desire to recognize and contend for shalom in our city. Those seem to be at odds, but I think if I've walked with the Lord long enough, I suspect that he's going to show us how those two marry one another in ways that go beyond our wildest imagination. And I already have ideas of that, but I think he's going to show us. If he is indeed bringing us into the city, there are going to be ways that he brings those two together in, I think, pretty interesting ways.
Let's talk about Birmingham for a second, because I should say a concern that I've had as we've discussed this and as I've tried to share this idea with other people is you talked to me about, what did you call the movement in like the late 90s?
The Young, Restless, and Reformed movement?
Yes, the Young, Restless, and Reformed. I feel like there is this danger of compressing all of this into sort of a token almost, where it's like, oh, we're going to go be near the poor people and do a soup kitchen. Not diminishing that. Sure. I hope that we get to do that. I think that would be awesome. Yeah. I just think that it's a broader vision than that. And part of that is trying to understand our city. And so I want to ask you a question first, and then I'm going to answer it also. But how did you end up in Birmingham? Did you have any thoughts about Birmingham before you ended up here? Like, had you ever thought about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me try to make a
couple
fairly
sentences.
long story into a short one. We were here once upon a time, the first go around right out of college. And during that...
Because Ashley's from here.
Because Ashley, my wife, is from here. And she was in med school. Again, my wife is way more qualified in every respect than I am. But she was in med school, and we lived here for 4 years. During that period, we got married the year after college. So we were here 4 years. During that first stint, I actually thought a lot about the city's brokenness. And I was interested in community and economic development, and almost went to grad school for that, and was interested in, like, microfinance was a big thing back in my early out of college years. It was really getting going in more like super impoverished areas of the world, but people were doing stuff like that, micro lending in Birmingham, that kind of thing. So I think I had a heart and ear toward those things, and even when it comes to more of the racial brokenness of Birmingham's history, was interested in that and made inroads to befriend a group of people that were different from me. We left in 2014, went to DC. I was in seminary, she was in residency, when we then just both got jobs after that. Never thought we'd come back to Birmingham. We came back to Birmingham after 6 years of a lot of life, and our primary reason for coming back to Birmingham was to, like, hit reset, because we had burned out. I had certainly burned out of ministry, wasn't going to go back into it. And I think a lot of the early days of those sort of formative years during our first go round probably sat latent within my heart. And I think we talked about this maybe the last podcast episode. I think I'd also had experiences that made me wary and leery toward
Sure.
the sort of social justice warrior like mode of like, there are ways that this has been done that seem maybe not in line with the biblical model. And that was so loud and out there. And I think I got turned off to like, oh, like this is just a show. This is just like a performative thing that people do. And that just turned me off. So I think there's a lot happening. But again, I think all these things were there. And when we got here, I just wanted to rest. I wanted to come back to life. That's where a lot of the initial spark for restoration our church came from. And it's still that to this day, and will continue to be that. But the longer you live in a place, if your eyes are open at all, the more your heart is pricked for the places that you see that are just not right and not in order with God's desire for how life ought to operate and how people ought to relate to one another. And so I think we've been in Birmingham now for coming on 6 years. And that's long enough to be in a place and recognize its problems and hopefully grow in Christ-like compassion enough to want to enter into those places with people.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Now let me share with you something funny that you're somewhat aware of, at least. Yeah. But I grew up in Gadsden, which is like an hour north of Birmingham. And especially as I grew, I mean, I kind of always felt this. It's very strange to grow up in a place and feel like an outsider anyway. And if I tried to get into why I felt that way, this would be a very long podcast episode. But I never felt very settled there. And I had this Springsteenian like longing for something that was out there. Which is, if you don't listen to a lot of Bruce Springsteen, he talks about that a lot, but he literally has a line where he says, I know there's something happening somewhere, which is, I like that because it's so vague. And I've felt that, especially as a younger person. And what's funny is I'm not the only person that grew up there that felt that way because it's a much smaller town. And for a lot of people, that meant moving to New York or California or something like that. But for me, Birmingham was big enough.
Big city of Birmingham.
That's right. And I, as a child, we would come to Birmingham on special occasions. So it felt like a special, magical place.
It's the Magic City.
It is the Magic City. And then I also did my first year of college here, moved away. And when I met my wife, we both knew that we wanted to live here. And we managed to find jobs here. And so for me, it was the opposite of I didn't need rest. I wanted somewhere bigger.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And so it wasn't like isolation and then spread out for me. It was more like this entering this whole new world. And I've also been here 6 years. Interesting to think about. When I first moved here, we could have potentially met and whatever. But when I first moved here, I, sort of had this one idea of what it was going to be like. And then I started entering new spaces and meeting new people and realizing the breadth of who lives in this city, which gets into sort of my next question or the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is when I say I'm worried about tokenization and flattening, I think it's important to acknowledge that Birmingham has a very unique identity for a lot of reasons. It is a place that was like huge, on track to outpace Atlanta during the steel boom. That's the primary export we had, and there's these huge train tracks that run through the city because they were carrying the raw materials and steel and heading in all directions throughout the country. And it was this huge center of commerce. And then it, like a lot of places in the
70s,
in the Rust Belt, it's actually, if you know much about the Northeast, it is very interesting. Birmingham is very much like New Jersey or Pennsylvania.
So Birmingham was always seen as the sister city to Pittsburgh in terms of industry.
Right. And it had a similar die-off. in the, I guess probably starting in the 70s,
Yeah,
and
the
even
EPA
through
laws
the
when they passed that shut down a lot of it.
right in the 80s and the 90s, and then I think there have always been people that have had dreams of revitalization, but even that has its dangers with things like gentrification, where inequitable progress happens that doesn't benefit the people that already lived there. In fact, it can displace them. And so, coupled with the unfair zoning laws that happened during the
Redlining.
redlining during the Jim Crow era and even after, it's created this very unfair dynamic that is both racial and economic, and unfortunately very linked. You have a much
Disproportionate amount of the wealth gap is suffered by those, primarily those that were black, and obviously now
and Hispanic
that have moved in and immigrated.
And so, if we want to have this vision of trying to bring justice, there is I feel like it's largely economic, and then it's all because it's economic. There's also a racial aspect to it that I think you have to have a very deft hand for, as a couple of white dudes.
Totally.
That not only, would you maybe experience that anywhere, but Birmingham is also a blue dot in a red state. And the city is, yes. And we have a lot of very socially aware people. And so, sort of like you were talking about that performative aspect, there is I think that among underprivileged people that I know in this city, I feel like there's almost a cautious, when somebody comes in and says they want to help, there's almost a fear of like, what do you really mean by that? And what are you actually trying to do? And I think there's a suspicion
100%.
that not only do we have to overcome that suspicion and prove good intent, we have to be careful to listen and make
repent.
sure that what we want to do is in line with what people need us to do.
Yes, and I think that you've named a lot of things that I think are important and that are on our hearts. However, I would even, and this gets back to what we talked about this past Sunday, I think our ultimate goal is not just justice per se, or equity, or correcting wealth or opportunity inequities, right? That's important. We want to work toward that because I think that's part of God's heart, is to correct places that, there are systems that have been set up that are like actively disadvantaging people. That's one thing. I think our ultimate goal is more than that. It is to be family, right? We want to paint a picture of Revelation 7 of being a family of God's people that reflect what that family will look like when Jesus comes down to earth and establish. No, so the last thing is that if family is the end goal, then the way you go about this looks very different. Because if justice is the main goal, that's part of the goal, but if that's the end point, then justice by itself doesn't mean family. It just means like equal opportunities.
Right.
Jesus' vision of the kingdom is not merely bringing about repairing systems of injustice. It's repairing relationship and bringing people together. We talked about this before, I just want to be in relationship with the diversity of the kind of people God has made and culture. I think there's something so rich and so wonderful. And when you live outside of that, when you live in your own little vacuum, you just miss what God could do to draw out different aspects of you that you didn't even know existed, but for encountering those other people and cultures.
Yes. And I think that ultimately, to what I was saying about being careful that we are having the correct intentions and doing what people need us to do, not just what we think they need us to do, I think that is our strength. I think that is what's most exciting. There are wonderful organizations in this and most cities already that are working towards equity, and I hope that we can work with them, and I hope that we can be agents of change. But what's special that I hope that we get to do is just what you were saying. It is not, you know, you're saved, and if you just pray this prayer, you're saved. And sorry that you're can't afford rent, but you're saved.
Yeah.
So it's everything will be fine in the next life.
Yeah.
But it's also not here's this aid now.
Yeah.
Sorry about the rest of your life. Sorry about your heart. It is hopefully
Both
our
and.
goal and our vision is that fullness of
In relationship,
Yes.
ultimately, that we aren't just helping people through the means of salvation or through the means of material need, but that we are actually becoming one, that there is a unity that is being wrought in this city. And I think there have been various attempts, and there have been some movement, certainly in the secular side of things, toward unity amid diversity in the city. However, as we've talked about before, to do that apart from the church will be inherently limited, because the means of our, what is the means of our unity? Christ. How do we break down walls of division? Christ. How do we bring about forgiveness and reconciliation, repentance? Christ.
You've been on an international mission trip before, haven't you?
Yes.
Where have you been?
Nairobi.
Okay, so you've been to Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been to East Africa as well. I've been
Mhm.
to Tanzania.
Tanzania.
I have I have a few friends there that I still keep up with regularly, and I adore them. And when you meet somebody at a coffee shop or at church or whatever, you have so many things in common with that person, right? You are likely from a similar socioeconomic background. You probably grew up similarly. You have all these things and culturally, you know what this person's about, and yet it can be so awkward to try to get to know somebody. It often is, for whatever reason. We should be better about it. You are pretty good at that. I think I'm also pretty good at chatting up random people. But you go somewhere where you look different than the people. You speak a different language. They probably speak a lot more English than you do Swahili, but
Fair.
But you don't really, you both are limited on what you speak. You grew up culturally completely different, different, economic status, everything. And what is it like? They're immediately your best friends. And what is the commonality? It's Christ.
Yeah.
You meet Christians from other places in the world, and it's like nothing else matters. It's just like, oh, you're my brother. You're my sister. Like, we are family.
Yeah.
And that has always been, especially since the first time I went to Tanzania, that is something that I've wanted here so badly, and something that I hope that we can foster is this idea of almost nothing else matters. Maybe nothing else matters. We're already a family, and so we can just act like that. And
That's
how
right.
do you treat your family?
Yeah, with love and compassion and care
and you
service
and you take care of them,
generosity,
and not just when it's easy, because you feel this obligation of, oh, they're my family.
So with that, I think it's helpful. This is a great segue point to talking about. You made the example of oh great, you're saved. Sorry that you can't afford rent. That the interesting dialectic between a group of relatively affluent suburbanites, right?
Relatively, because I make rent.
Relative, right?
Barely.
but comparatively,
sure.
If you were to draw
absolutely.
distinctions between your family and a family struggling in the city, those are very distinct contrasts. And I think one of the desires, as we talk about being a church that's moving into the city, is that there's this interesting crossover between the suburbs and the city. That the people that live in the suburbs, and I think it's important to just simply state at the outset, the suburbs are not evil. They're not bad. I think they're good. I think there's a lot that can be corrected.
Yes. Before you go on, dig into that for a moment, because we wanted to talk about, I think that it's very easy to, because it is exciting, and because I think there are a lot of Christians who would love to be part of a, again, for lack of a better term, urban ministry. I think that we should take a moment to acknowledge how important it is that we have ministry everywhere and
Right.
how people everywhere have different kinds of needs that the gospel can serve.
I think, and here's what I would say is each of them I think has distinct callings, the suburbs and the city. I think generally speaking, those two subsets have seen themselves independent of the other, right? Where the suburbs are like, we're doing our own thing over here. We're living our life in this little bubble, right? The city, people that live in the city are like, we are city people and we live here and this is what we do. This is where our life is. And there's not as much crossover. Yes, people go to work in the city. Some people go to work in the burbs. They have friends in both places, but generally speaking, it's more like independent hubs and centers.
In Atlanta, they literally call it in the perimeter, outside the
There you go.
perimeter.
So you're in or you're out, right? And I think one thing that I'm interested as we pursue this, you talked about the 90s young restless and reformed movement of people that like moved into the inner city and like we're all about justice and mercy and like we're gonna all live in one place like a commune and start this church and do all this work, and it crashed and burned. Partly, I think they had this either latent or explicit sense that the city was superior to the suburbs.
Like morally.
Correct. And that if you're not willing to do that, then you're not a real Christian.
Right.
And we want to go ahead and just like destroy that fallacy right now. You can live anywhere and be a real Christian. However, that doesn't give you license to neglect the needs of your greater city, right? So if you live in the burbs and there's a whole bunch of need of your brothers and sisters in the city, and even those that are not yet brothers and sisters, right? If you live in the burbs, and it's easy to do this, myself included, to live with neglect or lack of mindfulness toward the needs of your brother, your neighbor, your sister, whatever, that is to take advantage of living in the suburbs without the responsibility that goes with it.
Right.
If you've been given resources, if you've been given affluence, then we are also meant to think critically about what it means to share those with people just down the road. The last thing I'll say, I think there's more to this, whereas it goes the other direction. Tim Keller was a big urban church planting guy. So much of renewal for a whole geographical hub, like a metropolitan area, starts in the city and it flows out. And so I do think while both are equal in terms of moral value, the city has value that is distinct in terms of it's a cultural hub. Like there's so much of, obviously government, but also a lot of the creative energy, a lot of the youth, a lot of the vibrancy begins in the city and makes its way out. And I think if you renew, this was Tim Keller's argument, renew the urban core, and it brings unique renewal out into the suburbs. And I think both benefit from the other. And I think thoughtful Christianity often can come from the urban core into the suburbs. So I think there's a lot more crossover. I think our vision for this is not that our church is all moving to the city. I think there may be people that sense a call to move into the city, and I would encourage that. But also there may be people that feel called, and I think our family is one of those. Like we're gonna live in Vestavia probably until our kids get through,
Right.
school system, right? And that's obviously a whole nother conversation another day about school and education and all that. But that's sort of just laying the land of like these two have important roles to play. As we make our way toward the city as a church, it's going to be fun and interesting to see how those cross over.
Right. And I think that one more important and interesting caveat might be the word, is that I think the reason that in the late 90s you got this sort of, suburbs are bad, where rich people, where dragons sit on their hordes of wealth,
right?
is because, yes, exactly, is because initially in that time frame, there's been multiple suburban settlements in the past 200 years. But in that era, it was people leaving what they saw as as what they saw as like decay.
Yes.
That was largely because of integrating different races. Yeah. And people did not want to do that. And so I think that's where that idea comes from.
And that's fair, right?
But today, and especially in Birmingham, I feel like it is more fluid. It is
still not, depends
not
on
completely
where you draw the line.
Sure. But what's interesting is it's a gradient because we in Birmingham, like I said, in the perimeter, outside the perimeter, in Birmingham, we say over the mountain.
Yeah.
If you're in Homewood, Vestavia,
Mountain
Brook, we call it, over the mountain people.
Yep.
And that's the idea of like affluent people in the suburbs. And then there's
predominantly white.
right. And then there's like
90+%.
people in the city. And like Irondale is weird, where I live is strange.
Yeah.
Because it's changing now, but for a long time, it has been a largely black community with, I wouldn't
And
quite say
working class white.
and working class white, and I wouldn't quite say affluent, but a lot of people who own their homes in a time where that might have been less common for black people, and now it is very mixed of like young families like mine, older black people that still own those homes like my neighbors, and a lot of Hispanic population. So it is very integrated over there, and it's just this gradient. So like Crestline, is that downtown? Sort
You mean like in
of.
Mount Brook?
No, Crestline. Well, so that's weird too, is the way Birmingham has
Do you
99
mean Crestline
suburbs.
Park?
Yes, that
Yeah,
area.
Warsaw's juke joint is.
Yes, Birmingham has 99 suburbs, if you don't know that. And if
I
they
got
don't know
99
that.
suburbs, but a city ain't one.
But Hoover ain't one. And so there is like all this strange like rubbing up of like sort of similar areas that are different, different people pick up your trash, basically. And so I say all this to say, when I say it's easy to flatten it, I do think it's important to acknowledge and look at the fact that like this isn't Birmingham in 1994.
No.
Downtown is not like this scary, desolate wasteland.
However,
But there are parts that are very underprivileged, and they're like weirdly surrounded by more privileged areas. And there's it's almost like, rather than like I said, fluid, rather than like mixing, two different colors of water that have food coloring in them to blend a color. It's almost like oil and water.
Yeah.
Where you just have these strange pockets and it's surrounded by, you go to downtown and there's these very, nice lofts where people live.
Sure.
And then there might be a homeless encampment
Yep.
a block away by the train tracks. And so, and there is a whole spectrum of completely broke and homeless to extremely affluent in our city.
Yes. So where does that get us? Where are we now? So I think we should maybe conclude by recapping the sermon series of like what are we
going to talk about?
Yeah. So the name of the series, again, if you're a Restorationite, you know this by this point, but we've titled the series Church and the City, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Work of Renewal. And there are two parts to this, and it's really asking two different questions. The first part is Ezra, the book of Ezra, originally written as a unity, Ezra and Nehemiah. But Ezra, that section of the text, is asking, or at least we are asking through that text, what does it mean for us as a church to be a people that are being renewed by the way of Jesus? What does it mean for God to expand our vision for what it means to be a follower of Jesus? What does it mean for him to open our eyes to the needs and opportunities around us in our city? So how do we get renewed theologically, practically through the way of Jesus? That's the first part in the first question. The second part in question comes from Nehemiah, which is, as we are being renewed, what does it look like for us to pursue and participate in the work of our city's broader renewal? What does it mean to be people that contend for shalom, contend for the kinds of pictures that we get in Revelation and throughout the scriptures of a city at unity, living equitably among each other in love and compassion and support and service, etc.? What does it mean to be ultimately the kingdom of God? And how do we, as the people of God, work toward that in our city? So those are the two parts, those are the questions. And ultimately, it's giving us as a church the theological machinery and framework to enter into this new season of our church's life. So that's what we have ahead. We're really excited. I'm
excited.
If you're not at our church,
you should be.
Come if you live in Birmingham or if you're ever in town. But also, just listen to the sermons online, and you can hear and track along with us. If you'd ever like to support us as a church, feel free to drop us a little gift in our giving section on the website. But that's not an invitation not to listen. Just would love to be able to have you come along this journey with us this fall as we work our way through this series.
Yeah, if you are the person I'm describing that has wanted to do this, this could be your opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm excited that it seems to be mine, something I've wanted for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think maybe God has personally has had me wait to grow and understand some of this more before actually getting into the work.
Yeah. And
God makes you wait a lot.
Yeah, and there'll be a lot more waiting, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
But until next time, I'm Will Schaeferman.
And I'm Andrew Panic.
This is Accessibly Anglican,
a podcast for the Anglo-curious.